Actually came from Davis or Sacramento. I'm not from UCSF, but I feel like I'm from UCSF because I come here so often. And I do that because it's an amazingly innovative place. And in that process, I ran across this crazy guy that was talking about this thing called Salesforce. His name's Upinder Bawa. And anyway, so I'm very happy to introduce Upinder. And I think we're going to have the panelists introduce themselves, okay, because they can describe what they do. But Upinder, interesting guy, totally different than any other CIO I've ever met in the UC system, just so you know. And talking about an closed environment, closed-minded as well, is what you typically find in healthcare. And then there was this refreshing voice that I kept on hearing. We've collaborated on several projects now. Upinder comes actually from before UCSF was at Boston at Children's, right? And then before that was in industry, and I think that's actually the Upinder that I really like is the non-medical Upinder, bringing in his insights into healthcare. And I've met several folks at UCSF that have really come from the outside to try to help us figure out what we're doing wrong. I think what we're really doing wrong is we close the door. I have a little analogy. Cancer cells become resistant to chemotherapy when they close channels. They're very good at that. And we're very good in health IT in that we've closed all the channels. We don't listen to the outside. I just wish we'd change that. So anyway, Upinder, welcome. Although I'm not a UCSF person, you are. But welcome here. Thanks for coming. And all the panelists, and then we'll have them introduce themselves. And I think you'll find an interesting discussion. Thanks.
Great. Let me set this up and then we'll get started. So thanks for inviting me. I always really get excited when I'm able to share and talk about things that are meaningful in life besides helping corporations and making money. And I think that was a lot of what drew me to UCSF. And I think our talk today really is a little bit more focused on what are some of the innovation challenges in IT. And I hope the presentation I put together for you guys gives you a bit of a flavor for what do I think the CIO, CTO jobs are at emerging for medical centers and for healthcare organizations and universities. It also gives you a real flavor for what are the real challenges that a university like ours faces, and how do we as an organization, as people coming outside the organization, think about these solutions and deal with some of the innovative issues as well as some of those foundational problems that I'll refer to as well. So I do have two roles. I'm the director, I'm the executive director for School of Medicine. I'm their CIO, and I'm also the chief technology officer for UCSF as a whole. And I think Bernard said I should share some of my background, and I'll do that. We'll talk a little bit about the technology landscape. It's not what you're thinking. I'm not going to tell you what we're running every day, but give you a different flavor of how we're thinking about technology at UCSF. Walk through some of the key initiatives. There's a little kind of walk into our panel conversation about what are some of the challenges that we have around these initiatives. What really keeps us from really making substantial, tangible progress, and we'll talk a little bit about that. And I'll try and summarize it with, how do we align, technologists, technology folks, internal organizations, partners, vendors, and entrepreneurs. How do we bring all those in alignment? So hopefully I'll cover some of that in our conversation. So the picture was not my idea, and this was my communications manager is here, and she said this would be a nice laugh. But I really, as Mike mentioned, my background is really high tech. It's startup companies, it's software companies, it's being in IT, it's being in professional services, being consultative orienting, having services, and I found that was just an incredible background to bring to an organization like UCSF. And when I went to Boston Medical Center, it was great because I was looking to do something with my background other than help companies make money, which is great, but for me, it was time to move on. So that's how I ended up at UCSF realistically. To share with you kind of how I think about my job is several-fold. Can you guys hear me okay? Thanks. So it's really, I think of myself as a business partner. I'm not here to provide technology. Like a doctor is here to actually conduct medicine, but their job is to make the patient well. That's what they're really for. So I look at myself really as a business partner, and to that end, you've got to think about and you've got to focus on what the customers need. So think about our partners and our customers and our audience and the people we're building technology for. These are some of the fundamentals I think about. The other is, a while ago I learned you really have to pace the business. If you're too far ahead, you lose them. If you're too far behind, you're not good enough. So you've really got to narrow into a space where you've got to be thinking about technology and innovation just a little bit ahead of everyone else. If you're too far ahead, most of us have a hard time making that vision being realized. So there are a lot of things I do in that space, in terms of preparing myself as well as the people I work with, whether it's Jeff or Ed Martin in the back. We try and make sure we're doing things in a way that helps the business and keep one step ahead of them. Of course, as a technology leader, my job is also to find innovation. Where people may not think about it. And I was lucky when I got to UCSF, it was in pretty deplorable shape, so I had an easy time. I just told them, do this, and boom, I had some great wins under my belt. But it's tough. I mean, there's so much opportunity out there. We got to be careful. So identifying innovation opportunities is very important. It does not mean quantity. It means quality, and it's really hard for us to do. The other thing was make sure projects are really well structured and delivered. We have thousands of ideas. And we have a lot of people working on all those ideas. How many of them are really funded well to the point that you can prove a point and make it scalable? Not very many. So I found a lot of my time is spent producing money. Coming up with great ideas, getting people together, getting the business organization to focus on certain things, and finding the money for them to do it well. And lastly, it's more of being a strategist. And it's really about, pipeline management. And how many CTOs really think about pipeline management? I do. How many innovations are in the pipeline? How many seeds can I put in? But when it gets to a little bit more downstream, you can't have 20 different projects. You can't have, you can only do so many things at a given time. So you got to manage all the activities, either mentally or physically, as a pipeline, and we'll talk a little bit how we do that. And seeding concepts. This is not about, just continuing to work on things that have been identified, but I'm constantly thinking about 6 months, a year from today. I'll tell you one secret, I do not think past 18 months. The people in the audience that know me, I continually say, if you can't tell me what's after 18 months, you're probably, smoking something. So I plan for 6 months, and I think 18 months, and that's been a big part of how we've moved forward. Around technology, the landscape, and some of the observations, and these are very high-level observations that we found, is really, it's a challenge. It's one of the industries that's facing a technology disruption. One of the things I like to think about, and not many people in healthcare love me for this, but remember in the 60s and 70s, there was the semiconductor revolution, and in the 80s, it was the high-tech revolution. And what happened over this 20-year period, in the 60s, there were 1,700 semiconductor companies around the world. Today, there are less than a dozen. And that was a transformation. So the various industry goes through transformations. I think we're in the middle of one. I think about a 30, 40-year period as transformation. I think healthcare and higher education is probably somewhere between the 5 and 10-year mark, because we have budget cuts coming, we have a new generation of technology coming online, we have new physicians coming online. We just have a huge convergence of all these key components that cause transformation. So that's why I'm very excited to be a part of this industry at this point in time, personally. We don't do a lot of enterprise planning. We focus on 20 different projects, these initiatives, this grant, that grant. So to do a better job of looking at ourselves long-term and having a solid business plan, thinking about what can we sustain, what can we build, we've got to do a little bit more enterprise planning than we've done in the past, and that's part of a challenge of our DNA as well as our culture. And then secondly, I'd say probably one of the key things for me is, we have a lot of PIs who jump at it and say, I want this app, or I want this thing. And we try and pace them down saying, look, technology is there to help you, but what are you really trying to accomplish? And if it's this research, that's great. If it's this clinical outcome, that's great. But then make sure we put in the right amount of effort on the technology side as much as process engineering, as much as business transformation, or clinical transformation for that matter. How do we do that? We take different approaches, top-down and bottom-up. I think everybody in the room is probably familiar with these concepts. Top-down is, what do we want to work on? We can't work on 1,000 things. So what are the 10 things we're going to work on? And let's make sure that people are lined up around those 10. Okay, we'll make 12, but it's not 100. And the same thing, bottom-up. We have incredible talent. So how do we make sure the incredible talent we have really feeds those ideas upwards that we can take advantage of? But they have to meet in the middle. And it's a cycle. It's not something, we don't have a cycle saying we're going to plan for 5 years and then we're going to plan for another 5 years and another 5 years. It's really a rolling period, and that's why you see this is much more a cycle as to how we come together, looking at technology architecture, business architecture. They have to be synchronized in order to make meaningful results happen. How many of you have seen this slide? Yeah, there you go. So, Crossing the Chasm, one of my favorite authors, Jeffrey Moore. This is so true. And, at UCSF, it's no different. The challenge is we have a lot of brilliant PIs, and, Tuna will tell us, who have incredible ideas. And they're able to make it to this point. They build an app, they roll it out to 200 people, they think, yes, I've done it, I can publish a paper. What happens? They fall into the chasm. And that's what we have to prevent. That's what a lot of time we do is trying to help people understand, look, in order to really make it up there, in order for a program, a technology to be really successful, you've got to cross this chasm. And in an organization like ours, the chasm is infrastructure, governance, funding model, business process engineering. Once we started to put all those pieces in place, like example we did with telemedicine, Jeff can tell you all about it. When we put all those pieces in place, we have mass adoption for telemedicine underway. So our focus is helping people understand this. It's not about a lot of ideas. We want 100 ideas, but only 4, 5, 6 can make it over that because of money, bandwidth, mind of presence, executive presence, and really make it mainstream. So we're really focused on which ones really make it over and which ones not, but we don't have a lot of governance around that at this point. The other thing we are working on foundationally is fewer systems and more structured. So historically, our clinical systems, we did an inventory last year of our clinical systems. We had close to 200 clinical systems. More than half of them did exactly the same thing in different departments. So we condensed it down. We had a major activity underway to implement Epic, our EMR system, for about 2.5 years. And we shrunk that 200 systems down to like 80 now. And out of the 80, we're only going to be left with about 12.5 core clinical systems that run UCSF. The others will be folded into those. Same thing on our, we have a lot of research databases. People collect research in Excel spreadsheets, they collect them in Access databases, they collect in all sorts of things. And guess what? They're not siloed, they're not integrated. So we introduced some new concepts and new technologies that, look, we can do this better, and it's long-term better for UCSF, it's better for the patients, it's better for the research subjects, it's better for physicians. And a lot of time we spent is saying, move in these directions. So we try to start categorizing what applications we're building and why. The other thing we spend a lot of time on is some principles. Some of our guiding principles, and again, any one of us could draw this chart, but it's really about economy of scale, mission value. What do we want to spend most of our time in? How many dollars do we want to spend here? How many dollars do we want to spend here? And how much time do we spend up there, really? And the challenge for an organization like UCSF, I'll share you in a few minutes, was we were very poor here. So if your core infrastructure isn't in place, you have a different problem on your hands. And that's where we spend a lot of time thinking about, okay, how do we fix this problem? How do we see the initiatives up there? How do we make sure that we're leveraging our assets and we don't have 7 email systems that are owned by 7 different departments because we can't really come to an agreement on what we want to do with that. It takes people. It takes people to come together, talk, and the one thing universities are known for is collaboration, and collaboration, and collaboration, and collaboration. So this chart represents a lot of hard work in getting people in the same room, getting some of the leaders in the same room, putting together an IT governance structure that was meaningful, useful, had people buy in, faculty member, researchers, the CEO of the medical center, the dean of the School of Medicine sits on one of these committees. So a lot of the right people in the right places, talking about the right things. It's not done, but believe me, this is 10 times better than what it was 3 years ago. So let's talk a little bit about key initiatives. So far I've given you kind of a broad stroke of here's kind of where we're thinking, here's kind of how we put together some of the initiatives we're talking about, kind of the frameworks and the guiding principles. I'll talk a little about 3 major things that I thought were useful for you guys. One is fundamental things that we haven't done well historically, but we're making major strides on. I'll share with you kind of how we're approaching some of the business system initiatives now and why that's important for us and how we're approaching it. And then I'll finish up by talking more strategic opportunities that really will dive into the panel conversation. And I'm really, really jazzed about the panel we have today here. Both Michael and Bree and of course Josh from Salesforce. I think it's just going to be a great cool conversation because we all bring different things to this conversation. So I'm looking forward to that. So some of the key initiatives, what we call operational excellence, other people call business transformation, other people call keep the lights on. You give it your name, but it's really about simple things. Consolidate desktop. We have 40 different desktop organizations running all sorts of devices. Tell me, how do you expect a university, an institution, a medical center to do cutting edge work when we're fighting about desktop standards? It's really hard. So in order to get people thinking about innovation, you got to address the fundamentals, you got to make it such that it's not a conversation anymore, get them to focus on other things, but it takes a while, and you have to do it, you can't ignore it. Same thing with our data centers. That's actually the number of data centers that we have, by the way. I just took out the names, I was embarrassed. And our goal is not to convert all the data centers, not to merge them, that's a lot of work. But the goal is to tell people, look, if you have a high computing data center somewhere nearby, use that, don't build your own. Partner, and we'll help you partner, we'll give you incentives. So it's trying to get the people to do the right thing with incentives, and very important, service orientation, customer service, good price points, recommending versus telling them what to do, influencing skills. I have never used my influencing thing more than I've done at UCSF, or my negotiating skills or my partnering skills. It's been incredible, but it's been such an incredible, rewarding experience to get people thinking in this direction. Network improvements. If you had come to this room 3.5 years ago, you would not have wireless. Now, tell me that's a good organization. So we spent a lot of time cleaning up some of the basic things. Say you gotta have good high-speed wireless, you gotta have wired to each building, you gotta have 10G connections. If you want people to move their data centers to you, they're going to trust you with their data centers, you got to give them high-speed connections so they can actually, the actual data can traverse easily without being hampered. Otherwise, the slow speeds, that's exactly why the data centers were built, because we didn't have a network. So, we did a lot of blocking, I call it blocking and tackling, people call it dial tone, but these are sort of real things that we have to address. So I personally couldn't focus on innovation unless we had addressed these things. And we're really lucky, and I'll tell you, some of the other people that joined the organization that really made this happen for us. Business systems, so that's infrastructure. Now what about business systems? It was a problem. We didn't know what systems we had. Just like clinical systems, we had 200. We didn't know what all systems we had. We knew we had PeopleSoft, and that was it. Everything else was spreadsheets, silos, different organizations. We had 4 contracting systems, compliance didn't talk to somebody else, and somebody else didn't talk to legal, and legal didn't talk. It was just a mess. And it's not, people are just busy. It's not ignorance, it's not, maliciousness, but people are busy, they've just gotta get their work done. So a lot of what we're doing with the business units is really, first, putting together our roadmap, saying, look, this is what, in HR space, these are all the projects, and here's what's gonna happen. And of course, the first call we did, guess how many projects showed up in HR? 17. We don't have enough people to do 17 HR projects. Let alone me as an individual, I don't have time to learn 4 new HR systems this year. So we put a lot of thought into synchronizing projects across a certain domain, as well as how much change can UCSF bear at any given time. And we're talking about the average staff members, right? That was one. The other is, how can you do 17 HR projects well in a given year? You can't. So a lot of focus was given to, okay, what are we gonna do, what are we not gonna do, what can we merge, what can we terminate? And we did a lot of that. So that was a lot of heavy lifting at the same time. The other thing we just started to do now, remember I told you I don't think beyond 18 months, but we have a budget cycle coming up that's a 10-year budget cycle. So, we started to think about, well, what do we want to do? 10 years is way too much to budget for technology. So we said 3 to 5 year plan. What do we want to do in 3 to 5 years? We want to have an MPLS network. Okay, well, that's $6 million, we've got to put that in. We want to replace our, 3 HR systems. Well, that's another $3 million. Let's put those in as well. So we're just coming out with very high level numbers on projects and ranges, These are like, is it $250,000? Is it $500,000? Is it $1 million? Is it $1.2 million? 2-3 million? So we just have ranges that we're putting in place for our multi-year programs. We are paying some attention to certain things. Can we use what we actually have, like PeopleSoft, ServiceNow, Salesforce? We have a lot of great technology. Can we use what we have first? So rather than go off and build something else or buy something else. The other is borrow or buy or build. Can we borrow it from somebody else? Meaning, can we get it from another UC? Can we get it from one of you? And just use it because we're not that rich. Can we just leverage something somebody has? If not, historically, universities have said, I'm going to build it because it's cheaper, or I'm going to use open source because it's cheaper. And my most favorite phrase about open source is it's like a free puppy. The cost is not in the acquisition, the cost is in the maintenance, and when that person leaves, too bad. So I think getting the university to think a little bit more that, look, you're gonna have to pay for it. The question is, do you wanna pay for it now and recognize it? Or do you wanna kind of let it go and pay for it later and not realize what you're gonna pay? So just getting the university to think about those opportunities is a challenge. The last is revenue opportunities. There's a lot of things we do in IT that our technology group does. That's what Tunes Group is so important to us, because I think it's really about what can we do that we're doing well today that we can put into a package and we can commercialize it, either to other universities if possible, or the new D-Health world is changing a lot of that, so there's more and more opportunities coming up for us that we got to think about. But I'll tell you, anytime we put revenues into any project, that gets our executives' attention very quickly. So I'm learning how to do that better and better. And just so happens our budget cycle's coming up, so I think that's going to be a key thing for us. Some of these strategic opportunities that we're working on, something is telehealth, which is, again, video conferencing. It's ability to physician to patient, physician to specialist to patient, including medical interpreters. So we can actually have 4 or 5-way phone calls, not phone calls, but video calls if we can. We've actually, we got a great pot of money from the state. So we put it to what I felt was the best use possible, which was to put it through an infrastructure backbone within San Francisco. We can connect to other campuses, we can connect to other doctors, we can connect to remote clinics. I saw a doctor connect to a clinic in Lake Tahoe the other day, which was amazing. So it's just amazing that our specialists and our doctors can connect to other parts of California to do telemedicine consults. And we have now more formal programs underway, which are pilots, to show us what works, what doesn't work, what makes money, what doesn't make money, how can we recoup at least a cost. We don't need to make money off of this, we just want to make sure our telemedicine cards and our basic infrastructure gets paid for. That's the main thing we want to do. And that's all we're really focused on. We have some pilots underway, but you can look at those. Excuse me. So we have other things like digital health, and we have a lot of people in the audience, two in one, jumping another, who can really speak to this as much as I can, which is what's our vision behind digital health. And it's really about how do we take, the innovators at UCSF, and the innovators are, it's not just people, it's data, it's processes, it's access to clinicians, it's access to patients, it's access to researchers, it's access to research subjects themselves. So there's a lot of assets, and how can we capitalize on it to make them easier into digital health applications? And when we say applications, we're not just talking about, software. How do we apply it in a way that's really meaningful? We have some foundations we put in place. So why is this really important now? Because we have some key foundational elements. And we just picked one, which was Epic. There are so many other foundations that are in place now for us to actually do a great job. This is a challenge. This is one of two slides I stole, but I love this. That's our pain point. That's our pain point. We have broad, great ideas. What we need is real solid business models, a business strategy. The infrastructure is much easier now with a lot of our partners, but honestly, it takes money to do these things. These are not cheap. You can do them cheap, but they don't scale to a level that would be meaningful in an organization like ours. And it takes development talent. So a lot of time we're going to be focused in the coming year on digital health is to address some of these key concerns. How do we make money? How do we find funding? How do we find the right development partners? How do we capitalize on the opportunities that we have and bring our assets to bear as part of this process? These are just a couple of examples of digital health. I think these are some of the good ones. I think, we actually did a breast cancer trial, collecting information on mobile devices using our Salesforce platform as well, integrating that with our EMR and doing analytics. So I spoke to the PI about 2 months ago, Dr. Laura Esserman, and she actually said that was after about 3 years of investing in the system, she saw her first patient, which was triggered by some of the parameters that she had set in the system. So the moment that patient went outside the parameters, she got an email saying this patient might be susceptible to this particular strain of cancer. And she sat there for like 5 minutes in shock. This is exactly what she had dreamt her vision to be, that I can't pay attention to every patient I see, or my colleague's patient. How do we make sure the system's intelligent enough to know that if certain things fall outside of certain parameters, send me an email? Now, one can ask, why is it not in the EMR? Because the EMR doesn't contain that information. That intelligence is contained within the researchers. The researchers know that stuff. And to get it from the researcher to get it into clinical practice, it's a very long cycle. So this really shortens down that cycle. I think those are some of the great stories that we've heard. Just integrating mobile devices into REDCap surveys, just doing that kind of innovation as far as we're concerned is so important because it makes it easier for the researcher and the patient to participate in a clinical study. Things like developing an iPad based mouse colony management system. What this is the researchers, if you notice, they go to their mouse labs, they got these long tablets, they check off what they have, they go back here, enter, go back and check again. It was just nightmares. So just automating that, not just automating, business process engineering, asking them, do you really have to do this step? If we automate these 3 things, you don't have to do them anymore. So it wasn't about just saying, what do you want? It's really about sitting down with them and saying, here's what you're doing. If you skip these 3 steps, you could jump over this and get to that process much faster. Or automating some of those processes which they'd never thought about before. So had they done that in the Access database, they would have just automated what they do today. They would have replaced their workbook with a database on a laptop. So getting them to think differently is such a key part of what our organization does and as IT that we need to do. And then partnering with research, just a lot of things around sensors, working with various devices. One of the coolest things I saw Justin work on was a pediatric device that there are a lot of kids whose rib cages protrude out or protrude in. So there's a device that actually either pulls out your rib cage or pushes it in. And we have to know, is the child wearing it? How many hours did the child wear it that day? So now we've got a device that actually connects to the iPhone. The iPhone collects the information, sends it to one of our databases. That database is then viewed by the researcher on a daily basis as to all the children that are actually doing that, collecting that information. I believe, if I'm not wrong, Jeff, that information is also sent to the FDA in real time. So the actual data is actually being sent to the FDA in real time as well. So it's not being accumulated for 6 months and then turned in for approval. They're actually trying to do that at the same time. So those are some of the examples that I think we're working on. But again, those are small pilots. Those are initial concepts that we're working on. The question is, how many of them can we do effectively? Not too many, because our bandwidth is constrained. So we need a lot of partners. We need a lot of people that can help us do this and bring this to market. And the question is, how many of them can cross that chasm? You know, it's one thing to start innovative ideas, but the goal is how do you get them to mainstream and to be meaningful across our population. Other innovation ideas that we're promoting, and really this is about promoting innovation. This is not about technology particularly. I just took Salesforce as one example. But the whole concept is promoting innovation is about technology, it's about business processes, it's about helping think through business problems in a way that's never been done before. It's not about building the next cool app, to be honest. I think there's a lot more behind it that we're focused on. So helping our teams manage VIPs better. They're coming in, they're coming out. Taking it from an Access database to more of a meaningful system that even our dean or our CEO can see further than on somebody's desk. And just a lot of things. This is the breast cancer research project I just talked about. Putting in place a business relationship management system. So UCSF never has had a system that does track business relationship. They've had many databases, many spreadsheets, but not a system. Never a process. So helping them think through the innovation part is very important. With technology like Salesforce, it's much easier because workflows are built in, notifications are built in. And our favorite, social networking. Social networking, it's a struggle for all of us. But what I've found more and more, it's really, again, it's the old thing, it's collaboration. People want to talk to each other, they want to converse about something, they don't want to be hampered by it, they want it to be easy to use, they want it to be something they can live with on a daily basis, not overcomplicated. And it's a challenge because I don't think we have all the right answers yet for this either. People keep talking about Facebook at work and how we need a Facebook at work for work purposes. And I'm just not sure there is such a thing. I think we want collaboration, we want to be able to chat with each other, we want to be able, do things in a way that, it doesn't have to, we all don't have to be in the same room, and that's hard. So, think about what are some of the opportunities, what are some of the concepts out there, what are some of the technologies, but how do we apply them? The examples we've said here, you're using Yammer as an example for this one. The innovation contest actually used a platform that we did build in-house. It was a resounding success. And then, something called SuitBrowns, which really augments our pagers. So, this was a small pilot we did with our medical center, where whenever a doctor gets paged, the information is also stored on their iPhone, and they actually can do not text messaging, but messaging on their iPhone, and the information gets logged as a clinical note. So, trying to see how can we help the clinicians and doctors and researchers and patients just leverage technology better, but make sure it's in their part of their daily life. If it's not part of their daily life, it's not part of their daily workflow, if it's not something they're going to do every single day, every hour ideally, it's not going to happen. Somebody will not stop using it, then another person stop using it. Before you know, everybody's complaining the system doesn't work, right? So we've all learned that. So we're just very conscious, and when we do things like this, we've got to be careful and address those up front and be honest about those up front. And that's what I meant by alignment. I think it's the alignment of understanding the needs of the organization. My organization needs are very different than your organizations might be, or other universities might be, or Mike's will be. But and aligning technology with that, making sure what technology can we use, but that's not the starting point. The starting point is what the business problems are, how can you solve them? How can you help them do it better? How can you help them think about the business cases, the use cases? The user interface design is equally important to actually underlying technology and databases. And then finally, how are you going to deliver that using technology? That alignment is a lot of what we spend time on. And that's what I look at as innovation for UCSF. It's not about producing the stat. It's really about how do you get UCSF thinking innovatively about transforming themselves for the coming several decades, so that we maintain a leadership position in what we do. Otherwise, during these transformations, remember the 1700 semiconductor companies over a 30-year period are down to what, a couple of dozen? That transformation period is here for us. So guess what's going to happen to 2,000 universities in 20 years, 30 years, right? We may not have 2,000 universities. We may be one major healthcare system. So we just got to be careful and be competitive. And that's what I consider innovation and what's so important. There's some nuggets in there we talked about, like digital health and so on. So some of the opportunities I wanted to talk about, some of the challenges, these are very few, but I thought I'd share some of these with you itself because these are more pointed. You know, funding and revenues are much more challenging for us. Obviously, you know the NIH grants are shrinking. We're still one of the leaders in that space, but they're shrinking. They're not growing at the rate they did. The revenues are shrinking and they're changing. You know, we were just talking earlier about you know, how many of us have read the book Who Moved My Cheese? It's a great book if you read it, and it really talks about the fact that, do you really know when your world has shifted? How do you recognize a shift, a paradigm shift in your world? And I think the challenge in our transformation period is that move to, you know, our cheese has moved. So the question is, do we understand that? And then can we address that again? And make new goals and target those new goals and make sure we're addressing those in a meaningful way. You know, we have some great new team members. Elzer, the new CIO of our campus unit. And, you know, it's really about more leadership that he's brought that's amazing. It's about having a new EMR system. That's another opportunity that has created. We're in the transformation stage, which is huge for us, that we're actually being in transformation. We're lucky. We're in the transformation era, it's not maintenance. And then we have things that are coming up, you know, huge data sets that we're going to be dealing with. A lot of storage analysis of images, which we've never done, it's all been visual. How do we do that? And you know, realizing that clinical research, this is about information gathering and then using and repurposing. So these are just, like I said, a few of the challenges that we're actually deal with. But we have some great opportunities too, as I mentioned. So with that, I think we're going to go into the panel, and then you can ask me all the questions you want. You've been so quiet and patient. I really appreciate it. All right? So, thank you. Yeah, that's one way to do that. That'd be great. Maria, if you could, please. Michael, Josh. Sure. So I think if we can,
Kill the light.
yeah, well, that's right. I can't see that well. So I thought maybe we could start off by just having each of our panel members introduce themselves and just share with everybody kind of, you know, of course, what company you're with, and also what is your day job? What is it that you do? And maybe just touch upon a few things that you think would be of interest to this group, and then we'll come back and take questions.
Okay. Hello? Okay. My name is Michael Keon, Managing Director at a venture capital firm called Berlin Company. We're based here in San Francisco City in the Financial District. Our firm has been around for about 15 years. We manage over $1.5 billion and invested in about 100 companies the last 15 years. As a background, I'm a physician scientist by training. I was a young physician scientist, obviously I'm not that old yet. Didn't have a long, stellar academic track because I decided early on that academic medicine wasn't for me. Decided that maybe there's other opportunities, especially on the innovation side, making investments. So made the transition from academic medicine, doing some work with a pharmaceutical company in New Jersey called Ventis, and decided to make transition into venture capital in 2007. For us, we've been around for only 15 years. We're not a story venture capital firm, but obviously we like innovation opportunity here in Silicon Valley. We've done well investing in drugs, medical devices, and diagnostics. But one thing we have learned over the last few years is that there's been an interesting shift in terms of convergence technology. I'm sorry?
The mic isn't, we're not hearing things.
Oh, really?
Back here.
Okay, it's off again.
It's on now.
Okay. I'm not going to start over again, but glad to be here, everyone. Michael Keown. So I guess the most important thing is, from a venture capital perspective, we invest in about 100 companies, but we invest mostly in drug companies and med tech companies, agnostic companies. But one thing we have seen in the last few years has been really influx of really interesting convergence technology companies. They'll take some of the ideas from IT as well as from pharmaceutical and med tech, and we've been able to see these interesting companies. So we've been focusing actively within our firm to look at these opportunities to make investments, and we made a few investments in this space, and we certainly look forward to investing more in this space going forward as well.
I'm Joshua Newman. I'm also a physician, family physician. I came to Salesforce by way of academia, so it took me a little longer than Michael to figure out that academia wasn't the place for software innovation and health IT. My background was in health services research, and I was on the faculty at UCLA for a year before I got to Salesforce. Salesforce is a very large company. Most of you probably know about it. It's got about 8,000 employees. It's got over 100,000 customers across all industries, high tech, financial services, auto parts, you name it, we do it. I was brought in about 3 years ago to make the platform and make the technology relevant to clinical care. We've got a very flexible system. It's mainly for Salesforce automation to help salespeople sell, to maintain relationships between salespeople and their customers. And we realized very early on that that same platform could facilitate the relationships between caregivers, physicians, and anyone really, and patients. Relationships that are important to preserve and cultivate, and ones that really aren't provided for as much in the EMR and the typical health IT space. So we've been building everything from clinical systems like an EMR prototype that we built, to collaborative systems for continuity of care, collaboration within the institution, collaboration outside the institution. If you've heard of ACOs or value-based reimbursement, we've got systems that can support that. And we distribute it throughout the provider community, as well as pharma, payers, and device manufacturers. In my day job, I do health, my title is Product Management and Health Strategy, which means that we come up with prototypes and we show them, and we like to impress people and get them all excited by our demos. And health strategy is really just a lot of talking.
I think it's going to be really hard for me to follow that up. My name is Bree Jackson. I really got into this with the military. Early on, I decided I wanted to go into the military and do some research around lab and some of the different studies that they were offering. I went to Europe thinking I would start my own lab. I very quickly realized that the labs I needed to talk to were at least 100 miles away, around winding, twining roads with lots of sheep. So I decided to join a work group and talk about connecting labs from site to site. And that project quickly grew into about 21 different labs across Europe. So I really started out in IT as a fall-in. I fell into it because I needed it. And my provider at the time I was working with, my partner, was from Texas. And so everything is fast. He didn't have a slow gear, so we need to do it fast, and so that's kind of my start. And from there, I joined, continued with healthcare information technology, moved to San Francisco at Letterman Army Institute of Research before they tore the building down, and continued that with Sutter, became a physician strategist, building a lot of pro forma around reimbursement for providers, building physician foundations, working with IDNs, a lot of IPAs, a lot of mature physicians finding their way into information technology. My day job is, wow, what is my day job? I think you talked about my day job, because everything you talked about I was nodding. So currently I'm the Chief Information Officer for CalHIT, which is the Regional Extension Center for California. We have every county in California with the exception of Orange County and LA. I support roughly about 8,000 providers. We have on rostered about 18,000 providers, providing direct EHR adoption assistance to those providers. And I really did fall into information technology.
Great, thank you. Bree, could you share a little bit about what innovation does Calypso do, or what innovation would help Calypso?
Wow. So it's a long story, but let me try to make it very, very short. before joining Calypso at Sutter, there's a thing called Suttermization. It's the little chain that they dangle in your face when you join that says, I believe in Sutter and everything about Sutter, and no other organization matters. And so after joining Sutter, and being there for 7 years, you find that innovation happens, but it happens in regions. And so one of the things I learned very early on is how to walk the walk and talk the talk, but I didn't know anything about quality. So I left Sutter to really join a quality information organization, and that was Lumetra. So with CalHIPSO coming online as the Regional Extension Center, I'd been there for about 7 years as their Vice President of Healthcare Services. What I thought was very interesting was that all of the players, all the IDNs, all of the IPAs, all of the MSOs needed that service. It was one of their providers. So this grant was funded primarily for that work. So in my office, I really do talk to everyone across all market segments of healthcare around what they're doing, how they're doing it, how can I help providers adopt EHRs, how can I reduce the risk of providers adopting EHRs, what's the financial aspects of it. I literally, Alpender will tell you, miss every call I'm scheduled to have, but I must have 3,000 emails a day from providers, from their trusted partners, from their service organizations. It really is around helping providers figure out, and this is a big thing, what's their role within their community. Whether they are a physician champion, whether they are part of an IPA or an MSO, and what is the business model that they're actively participating in. What I tell providers is you generally have more than one. So it can't just be about your IPA. It has to be about your IPA, who's your closest specialist group, what network are you referring a lot to, and then who do you want to talk to.
Dumb question, what's an IPA, MSO?
Sorry. Independent Physicians Association, so your Brown and Tolan's, MSOs are managed service organization, and they typically will provide a service such as billing and accounts receivable. And then the Physician Foundation is when we hire providers outside of the Kaiser model.
Thank you. Josh, question for you. Salesforce is now in so many healthcare type companies. What kind of innovation are you seeing that's, what I would say, meaningful versus pilots that kind of don't go anywhere?
I think that interestingly, the technologies that do go places are the same as the technologies that don't go anywhere, and it's not about the technology. The things that we're most excited about really fall into three major buckets, I think: social, mobile, and open. And we talk about that pretty clearly. So I'll go in reverse order because I will. Open data means being able to aggregate and present data from a bunch of different places. And the problem that we run into, the problem that providers run into, is the silos that you were talking about. EMR data has great data for clinical care and billing, but it doesn't have data about what happens to the patient when they leave a care setting, a hospital or an office. There's billing data, there's device data, everyone's walking around with devices. We don't want physicians to have to log into 20 or 30 or 40 databases to get information about their patients. And it's not really that we don't want them to, they don't want to, obviously, and they're not going to do it. So being able to aggregate data and have a unified place to put things together is something that we see and people use our platform for. The second is mobile, obviously, and you saw examples of it. So we see the same things over and over again. People want devices that they can carry around with them, that are intuitive to use, that are easy to implement, easy to train, and that have much more directed workflows than the very broad, you can do everything in a browser or an EMR that we're used to seeing. Even in our application, you used to be able to do, you still can do almost everything in a browser. You can make customizations and so on, but we're finding that on the non-health side and the health side of our business, people want very targeted, very focused apps, just like we see in the consumer world. We've got very simple apps that do a few things really well, and it makes people happy, and there's no reason why that can't spread in healthcare, aside from all the reasons why it can't spread in healthcare. And then the third thing is social, and social is sort of interesting. A few years ago, everyone was talking about, I'm going to build a social application. It's going to be social, and everyone's going to talk to each other and build these huge networks, and we'll monetize it later. And what we're finding now is that everything has a social layer. It's almost like saying, I can't think of the analogy now, but the point is that everything is social. So it's not enough to just build a network. That's been done. It's really about when you work with a patient, it should be social, because obviously you're collaborating. Medicine's one of those collaborative industries that's not really collaborative as much as it should be. So we see that happening. So the ability to bring people together, to bring sort of devices and ubiquity together, people say ubiquity more than mobile these days, and the ability to bring data together are really the three of the most exciting, I think, things that we're seeing.
Thanks. I have to admit, one of the best things we like about working with Josh and his business partner Clarence is whenever we've got certain ideas, we actually go talk to them about that, and they really help us think through what are other people doing in the space. So we have somebody that we go to, and this is what my definition of a trusted partner. It's not just about money transacting between us. It's really about getting ideas, thinking through what might be possible, what might be possible. What are other people doing? Hey, we're thinking about this. Does this really work? Have you seen anybody do this really? And with their footprint, I think that's one of the best things. It's that we're able to give us much more of a global idea about what's going on than anything else. It's been really good for at least UCSF. I'm sure other customers.
Can I make one more point?
Yeah,
just connected to that. It's really hard to do stuff in health IT. There are a lot of reasons why it's hard, and there are obstacles, and we can talk about it. Maybe we will, maybe we won't, but it's pretty easy to find that information. But one of the benefits of health IT that I don't think is spoken about enough, that everyone should know, and it's really exciting and encouraging because it's sort of a hard field in general, is that there's a lot less competition between provider organizations. So the ability for a hospital like UCSF to say, what's Stanford doing, or what's Harvard doing, or what's Mayo doing, and to learn from them, and for them to share that, because they're not competing for the same patients, even in similar geographies or close geographies. It doesn't really happen. There's a lot more freedom and a lot more spread, and it's something that all of you should consider and we should all take advantage of, I think.
Thanks. So, Michael, you're the money man. So,
So I hear.
how do we get some of your money? So seriously speaking, you mentioned, you guys do a lot of, you look at a lot of companies that are doing medical devices and pharma and so on. We hear much more digital oriented and applications and software and maybe even a little bit of hardware. So what do you look for when somebody approaches you for an idea? What do you look for?
And that's a great question. I think for us, especially the new fund that we just started, our key thesis for that fund is disruptive innovation. And obviously, a pretty broad spectrum of what we're looking for. But then again, anything that's disruptive that has innovation component, that's not a me-too product, biosimilar type of product. So for us, it has to fit that criteria, for example. But then again, I think what we have seen, especially in this space, is there's a lot of innovation that's happening in terms of technology, would be a product base. Obviously, that's really interesting about this space. There's a lot of convergence that's maybe interesting and innovative in IT sector. It's not being converged with the drug, pharmaceutical. You put that together, this disruptive innovation. So that, for us, is really interesting to look at the technical aspect of it. But then again, we also are businessmen. We have to put the money to play. Yes, some of the IT companies that come in see, or digital IT, only ask for $50,000. But then again, yes, we could certainly write $50,000. They have $500 million fund. We could write 2,000 checks, 20,000 checks. But that's not the point. There's an inflection point it needs to get to. It needs to grow and commercial, and obviously think about the exit. So for us, technology, we definitely get enamored by technology, much as the entrepreneurs do, but we have to take a few steps back and say, what is the business model? How do we get our money? And for us, our funds are 10 years. So technically we have 10 years to exit, but we'd rather get out in 5 years if we can, because everything takes longer when you plan. So I think for us, we definitely look for the few great recipes, I think, in terms of getting money from VCs. Obviously, we have a really strong idea, strong management team, but now we're not backing the 50-year-old Genentech ex-employee. Obviously, a lot of these digital health companies are 20-year-olds who've never been a CEO before. So we definitely changed the mantra of what kind of management team we back. So that's been a refresher for us. But then again, also we have to have great technology that could serve an unmet need, and then there's a potential exit strategy for us. So a lot of things combined, and we're learning from my experience in biotech and medtech and trying to apply it to the digital side. And I'm not sure if there is a true recipe that a lot of the firms have found, but we're certainly learning as we go through.
Thanks. Should we turn over to the audience a bit, just to make sure we capture people's questions? Constant of time. Go ahead.
Can you tell us, from the Salesforce and UC perspective, what Salesforce technologies are available to UCSF faculty members right now?
There's so the short answer is a lot. I think the more in-depth answer is we have a lot of, there's certain things that the Salesforce Foundation provides uniformly to any nonprofit, a certain discount on their licenses and certain services and so on. They also have an incredible program which, Josh and his team can share, which is the donation program, the 111, 1% of revenue, 1% of, employee time, and then one more person, I can't remember. But they provide a lot, and that's available to any organization. It's nothing particular to UC itself. But if you like, Ed Martin sitting by there, raise your hand, Ed. So Ed Martin over there can give you more exact details in terms of exact what software we have at UCSF. Great question. Was one here?
Mainly to the Salesforce guy. You work with both pharma companies on probably regular sales channels. You're familiar with FDA regulations and how heavy it is. Where do you see it's getting into the digital health area, or at least the health technology? Where do you see regulation kicks in? Where do you see it's limiting operations? And how are you preparing for that?
A few different ones. I'll give you some examples. One of them is, if any of you are familiar with some of the judgments that have been levied against pharma companies for inappropriate marketing or marketing things off label or things like that, some of those judgments are enormous, really huge, rivaling your funds. And so because of that, pharmaceutical companies are skittish about unstructured data and unstructured free-form conversations that get recorded. So that's something that's inhibiting sort of internal use of social networks in some of these pharma companies. Other regulations, FDA has very strong regulations around databases that record primary devices, because those devices are tantamount to an implanted medical device, and it's got to be accurate. So an inaccurate reading in a database is as bad as an inaccurate reading coming from the device itself, right? So they're very restrictive of that, and there are a bunch of names and numbers and letters and acronyms that correspond to those regulations. There's also been a push for, a lot of those are in place and a lot of those are settled. There's some talk right now around how EMRs themselves are going to get regulated by FDA, and there's a lot of concern, I think, in the industry that that these kinds of flexible technologies that have been responsive to innovative pressure, at least somewhat, if they fall under the purview of FDA, it might add a lot of onerous time and so on to it. So those are the three main ones. But frankly, I think regulation is probably a smaller hindrance than some of the other things: political culture, funding, health system structure, payers, and so on. That's having a bigger influence, in my opinion.
Michael, do you see challenges when you talk to these companies and how they're addressing these? It's the same issues.
Yeah, definitely same issues as well. One thing that we have to say in terms of these companies we are seeing, a lot of investors from our side that invest in the healthcare side, we don't know a lot about IT. I can't even tell you anything you talk about, because I don't know how you know, you're used to physicians. So I think for us, there's a lot of technical challenges we don't know how to get it around. So definitely we do have to rely on other third parties to help us validate some of these. So obviously we still, I think if you look at the people that are investing a lot in this space, obviously healthcare guys are investing, but then again, a lot of the traditional IT investors are coming into this area. They're probably better technical savvy guys, and we certainly do rely on them for their due diligence, because they understand this area much better than we do. I don't think we have a single engineer in our firm. We have 70 people in our firm, and so it's hard to say for us internally decide. So I think we do have to rely on these things. We have seen this, I guess a lot of the companies we looked at evolve. I looked at the database, and annually we see 1,000 companies a year asking for us investments. Out of that we invest maybe 10 or 15 companies. So if you look at 15 years, you invest in 100 companies, right? And then we looked at the database of how many digital health companies came through our doors. In the last 3 years, at 500. And we invest in 2. So the numbers don't work out. But then again, good thing is that we've been following these companies. I talked to our team, and we've been following about 100 of them pretty closely. And we're close to maybe 20 of them we're considering for potential investment, depending on when, and certain inflection point they get to. And we do work with some of the entrepreneurs that are in this audience and others. So we're learning with them, because obviously some of the business models and everything else is new. Technology is sexy, but then again, we don't know the application. And they've been evolving along with us. As we ask the questions, I don't know anything. And they have to explain to me, and so, well, they go back and say, well, actually, this may not work in this kind of setting. Everything else, they're learning along with us. So we've seen a nice transition and, I guess, maturation of the companies and their business models and their targets with us. And looking about technology, so it's been helpful. I don't know
Thanks.
if I answered the question.
No, you did.
So I have a question, I think, for any of you, but Josh mentioned that one of the benefits of working with a group like UCSF is that organizations, unlike in other spaces, can talk to each other and learn about what other people are doing and what's working for them. But that's one of the things that has fascinated me also as a startup company trying to sell to these kinds of organizations is there a source other than hiring Salesforce apparently, to find out what other people are working on in the health IT space and to find out what they're using and to find out which things are working. So if UCSF is using a program and they've proven within UCSF that that's good for the IT budget because it's saving them X and X amount of, is there a source or initiatives to track that kind of information and understand which stuff is working and what's the high quality stuff?
Not really. I think that on a very serious way, companies, we talked about there not being much competition. There's not much competition between the IT people. I can readily pick up the phone and call any of you and say, so what are you doing? And you'll tell me what you're doing. But if the CEO of Brown & Tolman called the CEO of Sutter, not so much. And so what we're finding is that the competition will just happen not so much in the value of healthcare, but the providers themselves, the patient value, the payer value. That idea that providers are being paid somewhere in the neighborhood of a per member per month kind of cap, or they're in some type of PPO setting. There's another larger service organization that is sharing that dollar value of that patient. So I think what you're going to find is that you find the segments of the market that are most a better representation of what you're looking for, and build your own. But maybe this is something Pernod should take up. Maybe that should be one of your settings moving forward, is to get those leaders around the table and start talking about it. I think we have CIO circles, but they're not readily advertised, so unless you're in that segment or working with that particular organization, you do not know about those events. So Pernod, that sounds like a great business model for your forum, since you drafted me in 2 weeks.
One other change Bree said it, I think, absolutely correctly. And I think the only thing I can add to that is we've also seen, when we try to make a list of things that are going on and who's doing what, it's very hard. For lots of reasons, including the people that are working on One Idea today talk to 5 other people and they change their idea over the next month. I literally have met, over the course of the last 2 years, a lot of my friends from Silicon Valley have wanted to come to UCSF to talk about their ideas. And they come in, they get excited, and 3 months later, hey, what are you working on? Oh, you know what, I tabled that idea, I found this one, and I modified it, and then 6 months later, oh, that didn't work out, I'm working on this. And what we found was it's hard for them to articulate what they're working on, what exactly the benefits are, because we're still in our infancy as far as, if I can call it digital health or health IT, we're still in our infancy. The only thing that I think we've seen is that, yeah, there are some EMRs, there's value in implementing EMR, those are some of the foundational stones that are going in, and beyond that, health IT is fairly vague, it's very foggy. Bree?
No, I was going to talk really briefly about how that works, which is we have a pod of providers, and we found a payer that wanted information, and so P4P, or for many of you, it's Meaningful Use Stage 1, we decided to build our own data analytics tool. We didn't tell anybody, we didn't really publish it, we just decided that we have a need. And what I think I'm saying is that most of this is driven from a need. So a very simple pilot project that I spent 30 minutes talking about was funded in 24 hours. The payer paid for the technology. We found the technology here locally because it was a good thing. And we talked to the providers, and we published our first set of dashboards. From our first set of dashboards, which are pretty robust, they include P4P, Meaningful Use Stage 1, some critical data for clinical outcomes from the payer, and some requested data elements from the provider. We've gotten 5 additional requests from large organizations for something that's not quite baked. right? It's not really quite baked. And so I think what I'm saying is that innovation is really, for me, it's not a word, it's a daily activity.
Great, questions?
I have a question. There's a lot of, innovative ideas, a lot of it driven by very bright, engineers. How much do you think it's getting driven by that, as opposed to what Bree said about a real need that's been identified? Because I sometimes see a lot of companies, it's like, yeah, the technology's great, but there's 5 or 10 or 20 or 100 other companies doing the same thing. What about trying to meet, because in healthcare, as you know, there are so many unmet needs that, there's a lot of fertile ground, and I'm just wondering how much is getting driven from that side?
Just a quick observation, you could ask the same question to pharmaceutical companies. Repeated innovation in cholesterol drugs, high heart disease drugs, high blood pressure drugs, and so on, but not in the long tail. People go where the money is, obviously, and I think that the engineers, the people that I've seen that have been doing startups, the engineers and some of the people that have a little bit of healthcare experience, they're making products that I think people want. In general, they're trying to solve problems, but I think the hindrance is, again, not so much that there's not a need that's being met, but more it's just so hard. It's so, the activation energy for these startups and the chasm, whether you call it the chasm or whether you call it what Michael was talking about in the life of a startup, that critical mass, the tipping point, is really hard in healthcare, and so people go where there's a huge market to try and get some footing and some purchase, rather than go to places where it's, the analog would be orphan drugs.
I think there's a definite natural selection because obviously there's a funding part. Maybe if you're an engineer, you're smart, you're good friends and family, they'll give you $50,000. You get to some inflection point, but if there's not a huge market or need, you'll not get the second funding or Series A. So I think there is a natural selection where the funders or investors, or maybe we're part of that filter, will figure out it doesn't meet the big market opportunity, we just won't fund it further, and then unfortunately the technology might have met a small need, but if it didn't meet a big need and there's no adoption by the big infrastructure or institutions, then it's just not going to go anywhere. And you'll see, there's so many thousands of EMR companies out there, right? And for us, I used to be in a hospital and we used Epic and others would say, well, we don't know who's going to win out. The VA system is great, Kaiser is great. Then again, why did was it Practice Fusion? What did they get $500 million valuation? Because it was free and it was easy to use. Somehow, there's a few guys are winning out and they were able to raise $75 million last year, right? So I think certain guys are figuring out how to make the business model work, get the adoption. I think Practice Fusion has 150,000 docs using it today, as opposed to many others. There are at least 100 EMR companies, but why are a selected few doing well? Just because they have a good model, they figure out the right formula recipe for it. So you're going to find this interesting natural selection happening even in this digital health field.
I think there was another question right behind you.
Yeah, just wondering, I'm not sure who up there would comment on this, but want to talk maybe a little bit about consumers and consumer health and people taking care of their own health and all the apps that are popping up to help you lose weight and figure out how far you rode your bike today and all those things, and how they might tie into some of the work that you guys are doing.
Sure, I can start some of that. I think that segment of the market is still emerging. I think, whether it's weight loss or bike rides, I think the ones that excite me a little bit more are the ones that help the interaction between the patient and their primary physician or their specialists, or a research patient who's part of a clinical trial. I think that area for us is probably a little bit more interesting, but also probably more monetizable, meaning it's something that we all can benefit from. The patient benefits, the medical center benefits, the school and the researchers benefit, and the software providers benefit. I think that's probably something that I think we're probably going to see more and more of coming forward. The question that we have to answer is what's really there that benefits us. The innovators on the research side is pretty clear. The medical side is pretty clear. It's either more revenue or lower cost. So we have to figure out what's the right business model for entrepreneurs, engineers, software companies to build modules or systems in that area, and how do we make it meaningful? And something they can monetize with long term, not just with one, consulting assignment with one of the medical centers. Other thoughts, Ray?
No, I agree with you. I think it also has to do with the patient that has the larger cost, which is our more mature patients. So most of the innovation that's happening in that space is for seniors. And so there's two companies that comes to mind. First one is Partners in Healthcare Foundation down south, which is a long-standing senior care, quality health initiative type driven organization. The other one is Dovetail, which does some of the same things. But what they've done that's great is that they found their organizational partners first. So they found the IPA or the MSL that they wanted to offer the service to, and then they took that larger, more expensive population group, and so the contract reflects kind of a value add to cost relationship, and they've done very well.
Quick question for Pinda first, but I'd like to hear comments from everyone else also. And on your 18-month radar screen, do you have in mind for the UCSF community the idea of actually having an app formulary? There are certainly some hospitals around the country, Mount Sinai in New York is one example, that's done a great job of actually creating a whole series of apps, and it's almost like having the pharmacy accept certain products and brands and drugs in there. And how do you feel about that?
That's a great example of some of the critical business thinking and clinical thinking that's required. So again, one option for me was to put together a technical team or technical partners to make that happen. And show the business units and the clinical units and how to actually do that work, how that's possible. But I think my approach has been to bring the organization along first from a business standpoint, clinical or research or educational standpoint, get them to think through that problem, take ownership of that, and find the right champion, and allow that champion, then work with the champion to actually bring it forward. So there is a movement at UCSF that is thinking about this as to how do we take our digital assets and make real assets out of those. And it's not always about making more money. It's not just about offsetting our costs. It's also about how do we improve research itself, the experience of our researchers themselves. Tuna and I were talking earlier about how the time to research is shrinking, and it's shrinking faster and faster. So how do we help researchers do a better job using technology and building it in modules that allows them to do it faster, quicker, easier, and more repeatable? And we can use that across 10 studies, not just one study. Or working with clinicians, how can we get better results from the patient's homes into our EMR, not in real time, but at least on a daily basis, so that people can track that more effectively internally and then react to any situations. So there are more and more, I'd say, if you had asked me this question 3 years ago, I would say I haven't met anybody who even understands those concepts at UCSF. But I'm very confident today that we have several executives that are starting to think about that and put together a recommendation and a proposal for funding within UCSF, as well as to, we'll go see Michael as well. Just to find the right financial partners for us. I think we also have people starting to think through, insurance companies would love, we've talked about this for like 5 years that I've been here. Insurance companies have money, if we approach them, they'll give us money to do something, and I haven't seen anybody do it. And so just helping the organization think about, you gotta have a business plan. To go see Michael, you have to have a business plan. It's not on a handshake. So same thing with insurance companies. So just getting the organization to think about that first is a big step. I'm just not sure about the other companies you mentioned, the organization you mentioned. By and large, I just haven't seen that business level of thinking in these organizations. We've seen great PIs or great clinicians or great leaders put together a program, but that's about it. And the program just is a very finite program, only maybe for pharmacy as an example in that case. It's not something that spreads throughout the organization. So we gotta balance it between, waiting for everything to happen, which could take years and years, or doing something that's short-term, meaning 3 months, and nothing else comes out of it, and it falls into a chasm. So a lot of our time is spent on, can we put the right structure in place to make sure whatever ideas we come up with, if we approve those ideas, we understand the outcomes, we understand the metrics, and will result in substantial outcomes such as the formula that you mentioned.
One quick comment, connected to the previous questioner's question around consumer health. I think the idea of a formulary for apps is brilliant, and I think that the connection that you drew between IT formulary and a pharma formulary is apt. And if you take the next step, which is what hospitals do procedures, you can imagine every hospital has their own procedure formulary. So if you think about the health value of what happens in a hospital, and you compare it to the health value of what happens in a doctor's office with medicines, and you compare it with the potential, it's not realized yet, but the potential health value of IT in how it can influence people's lifestyle decisions, and what they eat, and how they raise their children, and how they exercise, and how they deal with stress, and how they sleep, and those kinds of things. I think we see a vastly more impactful and just smart investment and value that we get from the IT. And we're not there yet, but I think that over time we're going to see information management and relationship management is going to be way more important than lung transplants, for example.
Mike?
Well, I guess I'll yell, but previously there was a comment about natural selection, and
Mike doesn't need it, he's loud.
and then I just remember your slide with Epic, and I thought kind of dinosaur, But really, we are in the age of the dinosaurs, and they're big, and they're scary, and they don't speak innovation. And so if you're a small innovator, how do you deal with that? You're a little mammal running around, and then these big scary things, right? At some point, the meteor is going to hit. But right now, that's not it. It hasn't happened. And so what kind of advice do you provide people? Because I know they want to come to you and give you innovative ideas and products, but there's that big gatekeeper called, well, I won't say her name, but Epic, I mean, they have certain ways of operating, and they're okay, I'm not, I use Epic, okay?
Sure.
But what I have noticed is particularly around the consumer side, that is an area they do not know at all, but they've closed the gate pretty much. They don't really work with companies very well in that. So what do you say for a company that says, I got this great app, I'd love to work with you, but every time I call Epic, they tell me, I gotta buy Epic to even talk to them,
Sure.
and they don't even want to hear from me. So how would you address that? Because that's limiting what you get to have as an organization.
Very true. But you did lose me after the meteor hit. But let me try and address that because Mike's point is so well taken. I think one of the key things that occurs in industries, especially the high-tech industry, it takes a couple of giants to make the foundations first. So I put Epic in that category. They're a great foundational stone for us and for a lot of companies, I think. You need an EMR, it's got to be a great EMR. Could I wish there were better companies like that? Yes. I think will more companies emerge over the next 5 years, 10 years? Absolutely. But it takes a lot of investment to make an EMR company. It's not easy. And they can learn from, everybody heard about SAP, everybody heard about Oracle. Well, before SAP and Oracle, there were 17, 18 EMR corporations that were making billions of dollars a year. And you don't hear about those names anymore. So I think if people like Epic don't really understand changing the landscape, they can't do everything. They've got to find innovation partners, which I think they'll get to eventually. They're just busy installing foundations everywhere, so they don't have time to think about innovation, in my opinion, at this point. They bought a couple of companies, some really good ones, Haiku and a couple others, I think. They were really good acquisitions. But I think it's inevitable that in a lot of the innovation that's going to occur outside of the Epic EMR environment is going to be other companies. It's going to be companies that have great ideas, that have put together, I love the word formularies, because I think they have to put together a formulary of solutions that fit nicely on or complement products like Epic, And organization like UCSF has to see value in that in order for us to say, yes, that's what we want to do, and yes, that's the company we want to work with, and we want you to connect with each other in terms of either technology or open up your APIs or do web services. The conversation we had with Epic 6 months ago are a lot different than the conversation we had with them 2 years ago. 2 years ago, they wouldn't even talk to us about a web service and API. 6 months ago, they asked, what would you like? We'll think about it. So it just takes a little bit of time, and I think we've got to get the right energy in the room, but we also have the right innovation partners in the room. It can't be, Epic does not honestly want to work with 100 innovation companies. They want 1 or 2, 3 that they really want to count on, and then those are the ones that they'll work with.
Do you think they're going to have to open up their API for the transition of care piece? Because I think they're required to.
I think they'll
It's
get
sort
it.
of a health record
Yeah.
issue that they discharge with, that has to go, it has to follow that patient. So if they don't open up their API, then, they're sort of violating the health record issue.
So there are ways of accomplishing the compliance without doing that. But, and they do it fine, right? So I think but organizations like ours will push them. You have to remember, our Epic system went in just 2 months ago. It finished 2 months ago. It takes a couple of years to settle in, use it better, get the organization to a point where we're now pushing the boundaries. And when you start pushing boundaries, you start demanding a lot more from your vendor. And the vendor feels that pressure. They feel it from us, from Sutter or Stanford, other organizations using it. Then they start to either do innovation themselves or they start looking for innovation partners. It happened with SAP.
I'm
It
an
happened
SAP
with Bomb.
consultant, so I
It
know.
happened with Clarify. You go back to the 80s, it happened with the high-tech world like you wouldn't believe. We were just very quick at reacting to this. And our industry just doesn't react very quickly. So pace of change is different.
I just want to make a
Great.
comment. If I was sitting in this room, I don't know if I'd be real excited, so I'm going to tell you another story. If I was in innovation. So EHR vendors are 2 things. They're looking for market share, and they have to maintain the sales within their regions. So being in this market for 20 years and being brown and round, you can find me in any crowd. So every CEO I've met at least 20 times, and we've met the senior vice president, we meet them 15 times. But what I find for them is the money and the investment in innovation follows the value. So earlier this year, I met a company that I was really impressed with. I was so impressed with them, not so much in their technology, but what the physicians were saying to me about the technology. When you can get 100 providers to call me and tell me I should look at something, I go and find the company and I want to see it. So I got 200 calls. One doctor knows me very personally, his message went something like this: stop, listen to me, and this is important. So I went to look at the technology. It was here in San Francisco, it was in Chinatown. It's a large physician group that historically has struggled financially. So for the CEO to call me and tell me that he was in the red, and he speaks as fast as I do because he's Chinese, I was so excited for him. I wanted to know, what did you do in 5 years? What did you do, right? And so I went to see what he did, and he bundled his EHR with a service. So I think your innovation needs to start, may not be the sole solution, you may not own the block initially, maybe just start by owning a square of grass, right? And this solution is called Apixio. And so I went to look at this system. And so when the chief of the Office of the National Coordinator asked me for a site visit, well, I knew where I wanted to take him to talk about innovation. So I took him to, it was horrible, because I forgot to tell him to take the bus. So he walked from the IHI conference up to Chinatown. So he was like bleeding in sweat, right? I thought, I'm gonna be fired for real. And so he gets there, we start talking about NextGen, but we talked about the EHR, but we spent a lot of time talking about that innovation. And that innovation was called Apixio. And I think that when you're thinking about what you're thinking about for yourself and what you want to bring to market, you really need to think about what is there, and not so much a hostile takeover, but a nice partnership and merge. And I've come across about 10 solutions like that in the past 18 months. And all of them are now embedded in an EHR. And by the way, we also use Salesforce.
Was there there? Okay.
I have a quick question about adoption, which many of you have talked about. But first, I wanted to congratulate the panel on representing an incredible swath of humanity in 5 feet of table space. You know, when we work with getting technologies adopted at many health systems around the country, we find that the chasm doesn't always come from either the quality of the technology or even sometimes the business model, but in the culture and the mindsets of the people. And you guys put it very diplomatically in saying that the technology shouldn't be too far ahead or too far behind. But I'm wondering if you have any thoughts on changing mindsets among physicians, among other caregivers, among patients and families towards new technologies, because we find sometimes that's the stumbling block.
The most hopeful, I think, lesson in that is from David Kuhn. If any of you are familiar with the structure of scientific revolutions, and the sum that I remember from when I read it a long time ago is that they don't change. And people don't change, and cultures are really hard to change, but there's a refreshing that happens. And so as we see younger docs come in, we see a lot of things about their culture changing. They don't want to work 24 hours a day. They want to have home lives. They're technically connected. They're social. They have all the things that we all know about. And they come into these organizations and they pretty much either ask politely or demand or something in between for some change and some innovation. We're getting calls from CIOs and executives basically who are in charge of technology who say, we've got all these young docs coming in and we need to provide systems for them. We need to provide a social network because when they want to meet afterwards, after work, they want to do it there, they don't want to do it in email. And they also want to talk about patients too. So we see, I think the youth coming in is a huge catalyst, and I think the other one that we're seeing now in medicine that we haven't seen before is the tremendous proliferation of technology in the consumer space. So we have a slide in we've got great marketing, our company's great at marketing. We've got a great slide that literally shows a chasm, and it shows your enterprise on one side, and it shows your employees, your consumers on the other side. And all the employees have like either a Twitter logo above their head, or a Facebook logo above their head, or a LinkedIn logo above their head, or whatever it is, and they all have tablets and iPhones in their hands. They're all happy and well dressed. And then the enterprise is these old client server systems, these terrible, painful cobwebs and duct tape and chewing gum. And that's a real problem for people. They realize, like, when they go home, we have these great tools, and when we're here, we don't, and that's driving also a lot of change.
And I think honestly, I think for each one of us, we think about it differently. I think Bree's experience would be different than mine. We just have to, we try and adapt to the organization we're in and what they can bear, what change can they bear, how quick can they do it. Also look for trigger points, whether it's a grant opportunity or whether it's a budget cut opportunity, unfortunately. So just look, I think those are the patterns that we all think about. What's the catalyst for some of those changes? And you gotta be quick on capitalizing those. So I think once you start doing that, you start to see the culture change. But it takes a long time to do it, and change an organization like ours to be more of a business model or organization, that's a lot of work and just takes a lot of different people to come in and actually make it happen. I think we're almost out of time. Can we take one more question?
We do have 10 minutes.
Oh, we do, thank you.
Yeah.
All right.
I'm not sure if the mic is on. Can you hear me well?
Yeah.
Okay. Hello? That's fine. Pinder, you had an example about how the system can help physicians to monitor patients' condition and raise that flag. Also, again, there has been several companies as of 5-10 years ago that they showed they have their own algorithms around cardiovascular issues or diabetic patients that they can identify the critical condition a couple of hours ahead of doctors. While the timing wasn't appropriate at the time, companies such as Afixios and other enablers make it more realistic now. They just make it available. The accessibility to the information is much better. So that's the first part you need for analytics, to find the right information and then run analytics on that to enable predictive diagnostics. So the question is why the reimbursements are also changing a little bit to increase the accountability of hospitals and providers. Do you have any plan right now, within your 18 months or next 6 months? And can you give us some examples?
Examples of those changes you're mentioning.
How are you leveraging those innovations in your system right now, or thinking about it?
Sure. The example, honestly, the best example I've seen so far is the breast cancer research system. So what actually occurs is we track information about the patients in the EMR system. Dr. Esserman has built a database with the research information in it. So collected through literally, I think, 15 years of research. They've collected data around breast cancer in women, when, how, where, their traits, not all their DNA pieces, but some part of the DNA pieces, their various parts of their history, which I would never think of, what part of the country they were born in, or what country they were born in, what year they were born in. So if they were born in, Vietnam, in 1981, the symptoms, the outcomes could be different than somebody who's born in 1995 in Vietnam. So things of that nature, they've put a lot of information into their research. And it's really to run analytics. So they run the algorithm through that, and they look for patterns. And that's the one example I shared with you, which you realized a couple of months ago, was that the first woman popped up that says, look, this person has this pattern, and you have to look for these types of symptoms in the upcoming visit. And she did that, and it was the first time they actually caught a patient for under normal other circumstances. It would have been at least 6 months, a year later before they would have actually picked up on those symptoms. So to do it 6 months, a year ahead of what they were able to do a year ago is huge for them. But those are some of what I will just call it the golden nuggets. And how do we take that and package it and make it meaningful? It doesn't have to be UCSF, it could be a corporation. And the barriers for that really are around, everybody familiar with fusion pumps? So fusion pumps are the ones that drip, they give you IV and medicine, and they're connected to your body, but they're also not connected to the EMR. So, and it took a while for the fusion pumps to be widely accepted as plug and play in our world, which is, plug it into the patient and plug it into the EMR and it works. And we've got, all our innovation at some point has to be that simple to use to be effective for mass adoption. And those are some things that we'll be challenged with for the next 10 years, not just innovation, but how to make it so innovative it's just plug and play, and the clinicians trust it, and the nurses trust it, like they trust fusion pumps today.
So breast cancer case is in-house development?
Actually, Mike actually knows incredible about it, so maybe we could take that off the
about it
table.
at one of our meetups actually.
Oh, thank you.
Mike talked about it.
Presented at one of the meetups.
So Mike can talk more about it afterwards. One more?
Hi, my name is Michelle Pettis. I'm a postdoctoral fellow at UC Davis. My question is really for Dr. Newman. I'm curious about, as academics, how to navigate that path for entrepreneurship and innovation. And my perspective comes from the fact that I was a nurse practitioner working in a cath lab, found that it was incredibly hard to report a lot of cardiovascular outcome data for American College of Cardiology and so forth. And so I worked with a team of people to develop the IT solution to do that. Now, that was 3.5, 4 years ago. The solution is up and running, and we've gone through patents, agreements with the tech transfer office, and it's an area that I honestly was not familiar with at all. And I've had to use this Ocean's 11 approach and go and find people and to really believe in that. And I kind of struggle with talking with my colleagues who are also academics who are sort of looking at me like, what are you doing? And is this, and I'm sure you probably dealt with some of that as well at UCLA. So I'm curious how you've handled that in your career.
So in the same way that we see that consumer technology is finding its way into the enterprise, and it's the same way that we see a lot of these kinds of movements, I think that there's a lot to learn from the enterprise world. So Upinder was talking about going from industry into healthcare, and I sort of did the opposite in a way. And I'm really inspired by folks like you, someone named Raman Kamana, who's a hospitalist at UCSF who came up with zip rounds. There are individuals, and I encourage all of you to be that way if you're in academia, who think not like an academic so much, but think like an entrepreneur. If you think about how academia is run, you write these big grants, very few people read them. You don't really have to have an outcome. You don't have to have an exit. You don't need to be successful. People spend, it's true. Well, I'll put it this way. way. I had my fellowship at UCLA. One of my program directors, a woman named Carol Mangione, brilliant, won a $30 million grant from NIH to study diabetic treatment protocols. Had great improvements in HbA1c levels, great improvements in hypertension levels. Outcomes were great, and it never spread. And that model might not be the only model for academic health right now. There may be an entrepreneurial model as well, and so you have to think a little differently, and really it means where's the money coming from, who is my customer, how do we get some traction, how do we get the flywheel turning, and thinking that way isn't so bad. You'll find a lot of academics who've built their careers and gotten tenure and give keynotes because they write big grants.